Okay, let's start. Number 1. The Claw of Archimedes. The year is 214 BCE. Roman general Marcus Claudius Marcellus arrives at the harbor of Syracuse with 60 warships, the finest naval force in the ancient world. His plan is straightforward. They are not afraid of Marcellus. They are afraid of one man who has never fought in a battle, Archimedes. Polybius, Livy, and Dio Cassius, 4 of the most rigorous historians in the ancient world, all describe the same machine. Iron grappling hooks on chains, suspended from cranes mounted on the harbor wall. When a Roman quinquereme 5 banks of oars, 300 men, 400 tons of timber and bronze came within range, the hook dropped to the waterline, caught the hull. The chain went taut. And then the bow of a 400-ton warship rose out of the sea, not tipped, not damaged, lifted, stern dropping, crew sliding toward the water. Then the crane arm swings horizontal rotation, under full load until the ship is nearly vertical. The hook releases. 400 tons of Roman warship drops back into the harbor from height. Some sank on impact. Most were too broken to fight. Marcellus ordered his fleet to stay out of crane range. He abandoned the sea assault entirely and settled into a land siege that took 2 years. The mainstream explanation accepts the machine without question. 4 independent ancient sources leave no room for doubt, and frames it as an overbuilt, counterweight crane with a modified hook. Cranes were known technology. Archimedes was the greatest mechanical mind of his century. A very large crane with a specialized grapple is achievable in principle. But standard crane physics doesn't cover what the claw actually did. A quinquereme's keel is curved, submerged, and moving. Hooking it requires the grapple to seat itself below the waterline against a hull under active oar power. As the bow rises, the force angle changes continuously. The arm is lifting a rotating mass, not a static load. To swing the ship horizontally while carrying 400 tons requires lateral rotation under full dynamic load. The hook has to release on command at exactly the right moment. That is not a counterweight crane. That is an articulated, load-tracking, swiveling machine with controlled motion in 3 axes under extreme dynamic load. The specific mechanism that made that work, the swivel joint, the hook release, the lateral drive under 400 tons, has never been identified. In 2005, a BBC and Discovery Channel team attempted reconstruction using 6th century technical descriptions of Archimedes' works. The bow came up. But the horizontal rotation, the swing Plutarch specifically describes before the drop, could not be engineered at full scale with period materials. The team achieved roughly 40% of documented performance. No physical remains of the claw survive, no blueprints. Archimedes was killed in 212 BCE when a Roman soldier caught him during the fall of Syracuse. The machine held off the finest navy in the world for 2 years. We have not fully replicated it since. What did the swiveling joint under 400 tons of dynamic load look like? What material gripped a curved, submerged keel and held? And why is the only machine in antiquity documented by 4 independent ancient historians still beyond the reach of modern engineers to fully build? From Syracuse, we travel to the mountains of northern Spain, where Rome built something even bigger and used it to destroy mountains from the inside. Number 2. The Las Medulas hydraulic collapse machine. The year is 1997. Geologist Javier Sanchez Palencia is conducting an aerial survey over the mountains of what is now Leon in northwestern Spain. From altitude, the terrain looks like nothing on Earth. Red and orange pinnacles, carved canyons, landscapes that belong on Mars, not in Europe. It looks like a natural geological formation. It is not. What he is looking at is the largest open-cast mine in the Roman Empire, carved out of solid mountain by a hydraulic machine that no one has ever successfully identified in full technical detail. The Romans called the technique ruina montium, the destruction of mountains. Starting in the 1st century CE, Roman engineers built over 300 miles of water channels across the mountain ranges above the Las Medulas site in what is now northwestern Spain. 7 separate aqueducts fed into a system of high-altitude reservoirs. The reservoirs were not for irrigation, they were for pressure. The engineers dug a network of tunnels horizontally into the base of each target mountain, threading through the interior in specific patterns. When the tunnel network was complete, the workers evacuated. Then the reservoir gates opened. Hundreds of millions of gallons of water, stored at altitude, were released simultaneously, through the channels into the mountain's tunnel network. The hydraulic pressure built inside the mountain from within, and then the mountain collapsed. Pliny the Elder witnessed this process and described it in his Natural History in 77 CE. He documented the method, the scale, and the human cost. He recorded that the miners stood on hilltops watching, waiting for the collapse that could not be predicted precisely, ready to run. He compared the sound to the fall of a city. The gold-bearing debris was then sluiced through more channels, and the sediment separated to extract the ore. Estimated total gold extracted over 200 years of operation, 5 million pounds. The hydraulic power was not trivial. Releasing stored water from 7 reservoirs simultaneously required gate mechanisms at multiple points opened in coordinated sequence. Pliny describes 3 distinct phases of collapse per mining cycle. Controlling which tunnels received water and when, at multiple sites across the mountain simultaneously, required a release mechanism and a timing system that no Roman engineering text describes in detail. The mainstream explanation acknowledges the technique as documented and treats it as sophisticated but understandable hydraulic engineering. Gravity-fed reservoirs with wooden sluice gates, opened by human operators on signal. The engineering is known in principle. Romans built hydraulic systems throughout the empire, but the coordination problem at scale has never been solved. The mountain did not collapse uniformly. The tunnels had to fail in the correct sequence, with the correct water distribution, to produce the controlled debris flow needed for gold recovery, rather than a chaotic rockslide that buried everything. How did operators coordinate the timing of gate releases across a system spanning hundreds of miles of channels and multiple simultaneous release points? There is no Roman signal or communication system documented that could achieve the millisecond-to-second coordination that structural engineers calculate the tunnel failure sequence required. The coordination mechanism, whatever it was, is unidentified. Modern mining engineers who have studied the site are more unsettled than the archaeology textbooks suggest. The precision of the terrain reshaping, the consistency of the sluice channels cut into the collapsed debris fields, and the total scale of excavated material imply an operational control system that should not exist in the 1st century CE. The mountains no longer look like mountains. Something built a machine that destroyed them from within. We know what the machine produced. We cannot identify how it was controlled. From Spain's destroyed mountains, we move 8 centuries forward and east to the throne room of Constantinople, where an emperor's court engineer built something that makes hydraulic demolition look simple. Number 3. The Byzantine Magnaura throne. The year is 949 CE. Liutprand of Cremona, bishop and ambassador of King Berengar II of Italy, enters the throne room of the Magnaura Palace in Constantinople. He prostrates himself on the marble floor as protocol requires. When he rises, the emperor is wearing different robes, and he is significantly higher in the room. The throne has risen while Liutprand was on the floor. Liutprand records everything in his Antipodosis, one of the most meticulous diplomatic accounts of the medieval period. He was not credulous. He was a diplomat and political operator in an adversarial context, with every reason to be skeptical. What he writes about the Magnaura throne room is eyewitness testimony, not legend. Around the throne stood golden trees with branches bearing mechanical birds of multiple species, each singing a different song, continuously. Flanking the throne on either side were bronze lions, life-sized, that struck the ground with their tails and roared when visitors approached. The throne sat on a hydraulic lifting mechanism that allowed it to ascend to different heights during the audience. Ambassadors would prostrate themselves before the throne at one level and rise to find the emperor elevated, unreachable, closer to the ceiling than to the floor, clothed in different garments as if changed by the motion itself. The mechanical birds imply a specific system, multiple species, multiple distinct melodies running simultaneously and continuously separate pipe or reed mechanisms for each species with independent air supplies, timed to produce appropriate intervals of sound. This is programmable mechanical music, running in the imperial throne room 300 years before Al-Jazari published his book on exactly this principle. The bronze lions raise a different mechanical question. Tail striking and roaring simultaneously, triggered by the presence of approaching visitors, implies either a hidden human operator or a sensor-triggered release, a floor pressure plate, a trip mechanism in the approach corridor, an automated response to visitor presence. In 949 CE, the hydraulic throne is the most mechanically significant element. Elevating a loaded throne smoothly, quietly, and controllably to multiple height positions requires a hydraulic jack system with pressure regulation, a flow control valve for speed, and a locking mechanism at each height. The hydraulic jack as a formal engineering concept was not systematically developed in Western engineering until the 17th century CE. The Byzantine throne was doing it in the 10th. The mainstream explanation frames all of this as sophisticated but achievable hydraulic and pneumatic engineering, compressed air bellows for the birds, counterweight systems for the throne lift, mechanical triggers for the lions, building on Hellenistic mechanical traditions that Constantinople preserved while Western Europe lost them. But no technical description of the Magnaura mechanisms survives. The Fourth Crusade's sack of Constantinople in 1204 destroyed the mechanisms and whatever documentation governed them. The Arab diplomat Harun ibn Yahya, visiting an earlier version of the court around 912 CE, describes similar mechanical spectacle, suggesting the system operated for at least 40 years before Liutprand arrived. How a hydraulic throne lift was built, maintained, and operated for decades by multiple successive court engineers, without leaving a single technical document, is a question that cannot be answered. How do you maintain a machine for 40 years with no manual? Who trained the engineers who kept the lions roaring and the birds singing across multiple imperial reigns? And what else was operating in the palace complexes of Constantinople that no ambassador thought to describe? From Constantinople's mechanical throne room, we travel to Song Dynasty China, where a man built a machine so precise it was verified by imperial astronomers and left complete blueprints we still cannot build from. Number 4. Susong's Astronomical Clock Tower. The year is 1956. Joseph Needham is at his desk at Cambridge, translating Susong's technical manual, written in 1092 CE. As the document resolves into English, Needham stops writing. He's reading engineering specifications for a machine that predates every European mechanical clock by nearly 2 centuries and contains a core mechanism that his team of engineers, working in 1956 with full knowledge of mechanical clockmaking, cannot successfully rebuild to the original's documented performance. Susong's clock tower stood 40 feet tall in Kaifeng, capital of the Song dynasty, completed in 1088 CE. It housed a bronze armillary sphere on the top platform for direct celestial observation, a celestial globe inside the tower rotating to match the sky in real time, and 5 tiers of jack figures, 162 automated mannequins, announcing the hour by ringing bells, striking drums, and displaying time tablets. Below everything, a water-powered escapement drove the entire mechanism. The escapement is Susong's most staggering achievement. He called it the Tian Heng, the celestial balance. Water dripped at a controlled rate into scoops on a large wheel. When a scoop filled to a precise weight, it tripped a release lever, allowing the wheel to advance one position, then locked. Each advance corresponded to a specific time interval. The wheel drove the armillary sphere, celestial globe, and all 162 jack figures through a compound gear train. The first documented mechanical clock escapement in European history appears in the clock of Richard of Wallingford at Street. Albans Abbey, dated to approximately 1327 CE. Susong's water-powered version was running in 1088, 239 years earlier. Susong published his own technical manual, Xin Yi Xiang Fa Yao, completed 1092 CE with detailed mechanical diagrams and gear ratio specifications. The document survived. Multiple reconstruction attempts followed. Wang Zhenduo's model in 1958, Needham's Cambridge team in the 1960s, subsequent projects in Taiwan and mainland China through the 1990s, all produced approximate replicas. Gears turn, figures emerge, the armillary sphere rotates, but the timing drifts. Susong's original, verified against celestial observations by Song dynasty, imperial astronomers over years of operation, kept time accurate to within minutes per day. The modern replicas, working from Susong's own specifications, drift by hours. The celestial balance mechanism, as built from the surviving blueprints, does not regulate time to the documented precision. Something in the water flow calibration, scoop weight tolerance, or locking geometry is not captured in the written description. The mainstream explanation frames this as a manufacturing tolerance gap. Tiny variations in bronze casting and water flow rates create cumulative errors that no blueprint can capture across the full mechanical system. A craftsmanship problem, not a knowledge mystery. But Susong's specifications are extraordinarily precise for a pre-industrial document: gear tooth counts, radius measurements, water flow rates, scoop dimensions. He was not writing loosely. The machine ran correctly for 39 years. Then the Jurchen Jin army invaded in 1127, stripped the tower, and attempted to transport it to Beijing. It fell apart in transit. We have the blueprints. We cannot make it work. What did Susong know that he didn't write down? How many other machines from his era are gone entirely? No manual, no measurement, nothing that made this clock look routine by comparison. Susong understood time. 2 centuries earlier, on the other side of the world, a Greek engineer understood mass and built a 9-story mobile fortress that steered 180 tons of iron and timber across sabotaged terrain on a mechanism no one has identified since. Number 5. The Helepolis. The year is 305 BCE. Demetrius Poliorcetes. Demetrius the Besieger is laying siege to the island city of Rhodes. He has already conquered most of the eastern Mediterranean. Rhodes is the last obstacle. He commissions his chief engineer, Epimachus of Athens, to build something that has never been built before and has never been successfully replicated since: the Helepolis, the taker of cities. Diodorus Siculus describes it in precise detail: 9 stories tall, approximately 130 feet high, the base footprint, 66 feet on each side, iron-plated on 3 exposed sides to deflect incendiary projectiles. The entire structure mounted on 8 massive wooden wheels, each approximately 15 feet in diameter, with axles thick enough to support the estimated 180 tons of the machine's loaded weight. Every floor of the 9-story tower housed artillery. The lower floors carried the heaviest siege catapults, machines that could hurl stone balls, weighing nearly 180 pounds at the walls of Rhodes. The middle floors held medium ballistas. The upper floors carried light, rapid-fire bolt shooters targeting defenders on the walls. Window shutters on each floor were hinged with iron and counterweighted so gunners could open them to fire, then close them against incoming projectiles between shots. Water tanks and hand pumps were distributed across the interior to fight incendiary fires from flaming arrows. The machine moved. This is the part that haunts engineers. Moving 180 tons of iron, timber, and machinery across uneven terrain on wooden wheels, while maintaining structural integrity and keeping the artillery platforms level, requires a drive and steering system of extraordinary mechanical sophistication. Diodorus records that the machine was moved by human power, thousands of men operating capstans inside the tower, their rotation translated into wheel movement through internal gearing. 3,400 men, by his account, were assigned to its movement. The gearing problem is the one that stops modern engineers. The 8 wheels needed to be driven at different speeds to steer under a load of 180 tons, over ground deliberately roughened and obstructed by the Rhodian defenders. No description survives of the internal gear or capstan arrangement that achieved this. No ancient engineering text describes how the differential drive of a multi-wheel machine at this scale was engineered. The mechanism is completely unidentified. The mainstream explanation accepts Diodorus's account, but frames the steering as a managed approximation, human supervisors adjusting effort at different capstans by observation, accepting deviation from straight-line travel. Human coordination achieving rough controllability, not mechanical precision. But the Rhodians flooded the approach ground with water and sewage to bog it down. It kept moving. The Rhodian defenders used every incendiary they had. The iron cladding and internal water pumps held. The machine was maneuvered to the walls of one of the most heavily defended cities in the ancient world, across deliberately sabotaged terrain, without losing structural integrity. Then, the Rhodians negotiated. Demetrius left the Helepolis behind when he sailed away. The Rhodians sold it for scrap and used the proceeds to fund the Colossus of Rhodes. The machine that took 3 years to build was stripped in weeks. No blueprint survives, no components, only Diodorus's description. How did Epimachus engineer a differential drive for 8 massive wheels under 180 tons? How was the iron cladding attached and maintained against sustained incendiary attack? What was the internal structural system supporting 9 floors of artillery and their recoil? Every question that a modern mechanical engineer would ask about this machine has no answer. From Rhodes, we travel west to Sicily, where the same era was producing a weapon so disputed that 2,000 years later, MIT and Mythbusters ran the same experiment and got opposite results. Number 6. Archimedes Burning Mirror Array. The year is 2005. A team of MIT engineering students has just set a wooden ship replica on fire from 100 feet away using an array of 127 polished metal mirrors. They are jubilant. They have proved that Archimedes' legendary heat ray was real. 1 year earlier, in 2004, the Mythbusters television program attempted the exact same experiment. Their ship did not catch fire. They declared the weapon a myth. Both teams followed the same ancient accounts. Both used period-appropriate materials. They got opposite results. After 2,200 years, modern science still cannot definitively determine whether the most terrifying ranged weapon of the ancient world actually worked, or, if it did work, how. The year is 212 BCE. The same siege, the same harbor, the same Archimedes who just defended Syracuse from 60 warships. According to the Greek historian Lucian, and later Anthemius of Tralles, writing in 500 CE, Archimedes now deploys an array of large, polished metal mirrors or shields, angled to focus reflected sunlight onto the remaining Roman fleet. The ships catch fire. The physics are not impossible. Sunlight focused by a mirror can achieve temperatures above 750 degrees Fahrenheit, more than enough to ignite dry timber. The question is not whether focused mirrors can burn wood. The question is how Archimedes aligned multiple separate mirrors onto a single moving target at range, with enough coordination precision to maintain focus long enough for ignition to occur. Creating an array of flat mirrors that collectively approximate a parabola, each adjusted by a separate operator onto a moving ship on water, requires a coordination method, an alignment protocol, and a targeting mechanism that no ancient source describes. How did operators know when they had achieved focus? How did they track a moving hull? How many mirrors? How large? The MIT experiment used 127 mirrors and 10 minutes of sustained focus to achieve ignition under ideal noon sun conditions with the ship stationary. In actual combat, Roman ships were moving and taking evasive action. Mythbusters repeated similar tests in 2004 and 2010 and failed to ignite a moving ship at combat range. The MIT result required conditions their own team acknowledged were more favorable than a real harbor battle. The mainstream explanation is that the burning mirror story is mythological embellishment. Lucian wrote 400 years after the siege, Anthemius 500 years after. No source contemporary with the siege describes the mirror weapon. Polybius, who documented the claw and the catapults with precision, does not mention it. The other weapons are corroborated across multiple sources. This one appears late and alone. But the mirror physics are real. The ignition threshold is achievable. And the specific detail of Anthemius that Archimedes used hexagonal mirrors suggests a particular design, a faceted array approximating a parabolic surface, each hexagonal tile individually angled. That is not a detail a myth inventor would add. That is an engineering specification. If the weapon worked, how did ancient operators coordinate multiple separate mirrors onto a moving target in combat conditions well enough and long enough to achieve ignition? No answer has been agreed upon. No working replica has demonstrated the full combat performance. The coordination and targeting mechanism, whatever it was, has never been identified. The mirrors may or may not have burned ships in 212 BCE. But on that same Mediterranean Sea, 9 centuries later, a different fire was burning, one that absolutely worked, one that no navy in the world could stop, and one whose formula was guarded under penalty of death. Number 7. Greek fire. The year is 678 CE. An Arab fleet surrounds Constantinople. The city is isolated. It should fall. Then the Byzantine warships deploy something no one on the Arab side has seen before, and the harbor catches fire. Not the ships, the water. A Syrian refugee engineer named Callinicus of Helepolis had presented Emperor Constantine IV with the weapon roughly 6 years earlier. The emperor recognized what he had and made it a state secret at the highest level. Passing the formula to any foreign power was punishable by death. Constantine VII, writing in the 10th century, described Greek fire as a gift from God given by an angel to the first Christian emperor and commanded it never be shared, not with allies, not with friendly kings, not under any circumstances. This was his firmest instruction. The properties, documented across 4 centuries of deployment, are specific and consistent. Greek fire burned on water. Water intensified it rather than extinguishing it. It burned green or blue. It adhered to wood, fabric, and flesh. It was projected as a directed stream from bronze nozzles mounted on Byzantine warships. Theophanes the Confessor, writing within decades of the 678 deployment, records the Arab ships burning in open harbor. Anna Komnene, in the 12th century Alexiad, describes the bronze siphon mechanism, a pressurized pump forcing heated liquid to a bronze nozzle. Leo VI's Tactica, written around 900 CE, describes the delivery system in terms engineers recognize immediately: a sealed heated reservoir, a pump pressurizing the liquid, ignition at the nozzle. That is a flamethrower. Not metaphorically, mechanically. The functional architecture of a pressurized, heated fluid delivery system with a combustion nozzle is the definition of a flamethrower. The modern version was engineered in 1901 CE. The Byzantines deployed theirs in 678. Greek fire destroyed the Arab fleet in 678, a second Arab fleet in 717, a Russian fleet of 1,000 ships in 941. For nearly 400 years, the empire's ultimate weapon. Then, 1204, the Fourth Crusade sacks Constantinople. The Byzantine court collapses. The families holding the formula disperse, die, and vanish. The weapon disappears from history with them. The mainstream explanation proposes a naphtha-based compound crude petroleum exists naturally in the region, combined with quicklime to provide autoignition on water contact, plus sulfur and pine resin. A sophisticated but achievable combination for Byzantine chemistry, but no single proposed formula matches all documented properties. John Haldon at Princeton, whose 2006 analysis is the most comprehensive modern study, concluded that no confirmed formula exists. Alex Rowland at Duke stated in 1992 that no modern chemist has reproduced all reported properties of Greek fire. That assessment has not changed. The bronze siphon mechanism presents its own unresolved problem. A pressurized delivery system for heated, flammable liquid requires sealing technology at both reservoir and nozzle to prevent premature ignition operating at sea in combat against maneuvering enemy ships. No reconstruction has achieved documented combat range performance. How did the delivery mechanism prevent flashback at sea? What compound burns on water, resists water extinguishing, and projects in green or blue flame? And what does it mean that a weapon deployed continuously for 400 years left no surviving technical description clear enough to reproduce not one craftsman's note, not one formula, nothing? The harbor burned. The formula died. But centuries before Greek fire lit the Bosphorus, a different kind of light had been burning on the same sea from a machine in Alexandria's harbor that ran continuously for 1,500 years and left no record of how it worked. Number 8. The Pharos of Alexandria. The year is 1994. Marine archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur is diving in the harbor of Alexandria, Egypt, photographing enormous stone blocks on the seafloor, the collapsed remains of a structure that fell in 1303 CE after an earthquake. The blocks are massive. Some are 12 feet long. They are the rubble of the Pharos, the lighthouse of Alexandria, and as Emperor photographs them, he is also confronting a question that no one has answered in 1700 years. What was inside this thing, and how did it work? The Pharos was completed around 280 BCE under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, designed by the architect Sostratus of Cnidus. Its height, ancient sources disagree. The most conservative modern estimate based on structural analysis places it between 300 and 400 feet tall, making it the tallest man-made structure in the world for most of its operational life, after only the Great Pyramid. It operated continuously for approximately 1,500 years, until earthquakes in 956 and 1303 CE damaged it, and it finally collapsed in 1323 CE. 1,500 years. Continuously. Strabo described a fire visible from the top. Pliny noted the light at sea. Al-Masudi, writing in the 10th century, describes a polished metal mirror in detail. Ibn al-Shaykh describes the beam as directional. Multiple independent sources, across 1,000 years of documentation, describe a reflector at the summit that concentrated and directed the light seaward. This is a 300 to 400 foot structure, with a fire at the top and a mechanical mirror or reflector system. For 1,500 years, someone maintained both. The fuel delivery system alone is a mechanical problem no one has solved. Maintaining a substantial fire at the summit of a 300-foot tower requires continuous fuel delivery. Two proposals survive in academic literature: a spiral ramp wide enough for pack animals, or a mechanical dumbwaiter. Arabic sources describe horses walking a spiral ramp. Either system load-bearing animals inside a lighthouse, or a counterweighted lift operating at 300 feet, represents engineering infrastructure we have zero technical description of. No elevation diagram, no load specification, no mechanism description. The mirror system is more unsettling. Multiple independent ancient and medieval sources describing a reflector over more than a millennium is not mythological accumulation, it's consistent eyewitness testimony. A polished metal reflector at 300 feet that concentrates firelight seaward implies a parabolic or faceted reflector surface large enough to be useful at sea range, a mounting system that holds it at the correct focal geometry relative to the fire, and a rotation or adjustment mechanism to sweep the beam across the harbor approach. None of these have been identified. No ancient text describes how the mirror was made, how large it was, how it was mounted, or how it was adjusted or cleaned. The mainstream explanation frames the Pharos as a straightforward lighthouse, a tall structure with a fire and possibly a polished surface nearby to reflect additional light seaward. Sophisticated construction, but achievable by Hellenistic engineers with known techniques. But 1,500 years is not a construction achievement, it is a maintenance achievement. For 1,500 years, across political transitions, wars, regime changes, and earthquakes, the fuel reached the top, the mirror remained aligned, and the light remained visible 35 miles at sea. The institutional knowledge required to sustain that operation for that duration and the mechanical systems required to make it physically possible left zero technical documentation. What was inside the Pharos? How did fuel reach the top? How did the mirror work? We have the rubble in the harbor. We have no answers. But in that same harbor of Alexandria, anchored and never moved again, sat another machine built by the same civilization, the largest ship ever constructed in the ancient world, abandoned because no other port in the Mediterranean could fit it. Number 9. The Syracusia. The year is 240 BCE. King Hiero II of Syracuse has just commissioned the construction of the largest ship in the ancient world. He has appointed Archimedes as its mechanical systems engineer. When the ship is finished, it will be so large that no port in the entire Mediterranean, except one, can accommodate it. It will make a single voyage. It will never move again. Athenaeus, citing the engineer Moschion's first-hand account, describes the Syracusia in detail. 3 decks, 20 rows of oars. But the scale of the hull is secondary to what was on it. A gymnasium, bathhouses, a marble-floored dining hall seating 60 guests, passenger cabins with inlaid floors, stables for horses, freshwater fish tanks, a garden with fruit trees growing in terracotta pots, a temple to Aphrodite, and a library. All of this on a ship, underway. The artillery platforms carried catapults capable of hurling 180-pound stones, 600 feet, and rapid-fire bolt shooters with a claimed range of 600 yards. Archimedes designed grappling systems similar to his claw. The hull was triple-planked, and the outer planking was sheathed in lead for protection and waterproofing, a technique modern naval architects recognize as a valid anti-fouling and impact resistance method, but one that adds hundreds of tons of dead weight. What made the ship mechanically impossible for its era was the bilge problem. A hull this size, with this many people, animals, and freshwater systems on board, produces bilge water at a rate that hand bailing cannot match. Ships of this size, operating with conventional bailing methods, would gradually flood and sink. Athenaeus records that Archimedes solved this with a cochlea, an Archimedes screw, a helical screw inside a tube that, when turned by a single man, could drain the entire bilge continuously. One man, the entire bilge, continuously. When European shipbuilders adopted screw pumps for bilge control in the 16th century CE, they were reinventing what Archimedes had deployed at full scale 17 centuries earlier. The ship was so large that when it was completed, Hiero could not move it to the water. Athenaeus records that Archimedes built a mechanical launching system, a compound pulley arrangement that allowed one man to move the fully loaded ship from its construction berth into the harbor. The spectators reportedly could not believe what they were seeing. Archimedes, watching the crowd's reaction, is said to have remarked that with a lever long enough and a place to stand, he could move the world. The mainstream explanation frames the mechanical systems as sophisticated but theoretically achievable applications of known Hellenistic principles, screw pumps, compound pulleys, catapult artillery, but the specific mechanical parameters that made the cochlea work at the bilge pumping rate Moskion describes have never been replicated using period materials. The compound pulley arrangement that moved a fully loaded ship with a single operator has not been demonstrated at that scale. And the ship's final fate is the most mechanically haunting detail of all. It sailed to Alexandria, delivered its cargo to Ptolemy III, was received with amazement by the entire city, and then it never moved again. Not because it broke, because no other port could fit it. It sat in Alexandria harbor, too large for the world it was built in, until it was lost to history. What did Archimedes put inside the hull that we haven't identified? What other mechanical systems supported a city's worth of infrastructure on a ship underway? We have Moskion's account. We have no blueprints. From a ship too large for any harbor, we travel to the opposite end of the ancient world, where an empire built a hydraulic machine that covered 400 square miles of jungle and ran for 600 years. Number 10. The Angkor hydraulic machine. The year is 2007. A team of researchers led by Damien Evans at the University of Sydney is processing aerial LiDAR data collected over the Angkor region of Cambodia, laser scanning that penetrates jungle canopy and maps ground features invisible from the surface. As the data resolves, Evans and his team go quiet. What the LiDAR is showing is not a city, it is a machine. A hydraulic machine covering 400 square miles. Evans publishes the findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The paper states that the true extent of Angkor's water management infrastructure is, and this is a direct quote, of a scale and complexity that has no parallel in the pre-industrial world. The Khmer Empire built Angkor between 802 and 1431 CE in what is now northwestern Cambodia. At its peak around 1200 CE, the city held an estimated 750,000 people more than medieval London, Paris, and Rome combined. In a monsoon climate, that population created an extreme hydraulic challenge. 6 months of catastrophic flooding, 6 months of drought, both requiring simultaneous control at landscape scale. The LiDAR revealed a network of canals, reservoirs, embankments, and distribution channels that transformed the hydraulic behavior of an entire watershed. The two main reservoirs, the West Baray and East Baray, held approximately 2 billion gallons combined. Hundreds of smaller reservoirs connected by channels routed water across the 400 square mile urban area with precision. Mechanical gates and sluices directed flow in response to seasonal conditions. The system ran for 600 years. This is not construction. This is sustained mechanical operation across 6 centuries of monsoons, droughts, and political turbulence. Someone understood the hydraulic behavior of an entire watershed well enough to keep this machine running through all of it. Modern hydraulic engineers studying the LiDAR data have found features they do not fully understand. The channel network contains what appear to be deliberate interference patterns, points where channels of different widths converge in configurations that create specific flow velocity effects. The geometry suggests knowledge of hydraulic flow dynamics not formally codified in Western engineering until the 18th century. Then, around 1430 CE, the machine failed. Angkor was abandoned. The proximate cause was a series of extreme rainfall events that overwhelmed the system's drainage capacity. But Evans' team found evidence of emergency modifications in the early 15th century. Channels widened, new overflow routes cut, existing infrastructure modified. The engineers saw the problem. They tried to fix it. The machine failed anyway. We cannot identify what failed first, why the modifications weren't sufficient, or what the single-point failure was. We have 400 square miles of infrastructure mapped in extraordinary detail, We cannot identify the operating logic that sustained it for 6 centuries, the knowledge that built it, or the mechanism that ended it. A crane pulled 400-ton Roman warships from the sea, and no one has fully replicated how. Romans destroyed mountains with water on a coordination mechanism they didn't document. A throne room lifted an emperor to the ceiling on a hydraulic jack in the 10th century. A clock tower ran to precision its own blueprints cannot reproduce. A 9-story iron fortress steered itself across sabotaged terrain on a mechanism no one has identified. Mirrors may or may not have burned ships in harbor. A fire burned on water and died with the empire that made it. A lighthouse ran for 1,500 years on fuel no one can trace to the top. A ship was built too large for the world. And a hydraulic machine managed an entire watershed for 6 centuries, then failed in a way that 6 centuries of engineering knowledge couldn't prevent. These machines were not accidents. They were built by people who understood things we have not relearned. Subscribe if that bothers you the way it should. Drop a comment on which machine felt most impossible, and let us know where in the world you're watching from.